What will Telstra and TPG's spectrum sharing arrangement mean for your mobile service?
And are rural electric vehicle drivers being shortchanged? Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support.
Hi there. Welcome back to Vertical Hold Behind the Tech News, the tech podcast where we catch up with Australia's leading tech journalists to dive into the big stories of the week. I'm Alex Kidman, and joining me in the virtual Vertical Hold studios, as always, is the one and only Adam Turner. Hey Adam, big news in robotics. No, not robot cats, not robot dogs, or even robot terminators.
Robot ducks? I'm worried
Not
about
quite.
the robot ducks.
Not quite. Aldi has announced it has a pizza robot, but only in one store and as a total promotional gimmick, which honestly doesn't really sound great, let's face it. Can you think of a foodstuff that a robot might prepare worse than a pizza?
I don't fancy a robot's chances of making a great soup, but it'd be totally worth it to hear it shout, "No soup for you!"
Look, soup, it's a nozzle, right? I mean, you just squirt it out into a bowl.
No. That's like saying soup. Doesn't that come from a can? No.
It does when you get it out of the robot, I think. This week, we're also being joined by ABC Radio Western Plains breakfast host and a fine ex-tech journo in his own right, Nic Healey. Hey, Nick, what food should the robot chefs tackle next after pizza and soup?
Oh, look, if you're going to do pizza and soup, you might as well bring everything together and get me a nice bowl of wonton noodle soup. If a robot can do that, we might as well just bow down. It's all over.
I, for one, want a robot-prepared kebab.
Oh,
Like giving the swords, that could be dangerous, I guess.
Yeah, no, I want the swords. I want some sort of General Grievous kind of robot just carving meat away.
If anyone from the patent office is listening, we'll take all bids.
If anyone from Disney's listening, not that General Grievous, a totally different General Grievous.
Totally different one.
Now, a lot of tech talk focuses on the big city where the big deals tend to be made, but there's a big telco deal this week that'll have a big impact on rural and regional Australia, with Telstra and TPG announcing a spectrum and tower sharing agreement. Alex, what's the story here?
So this is a bit of a surprise one because for years and years and years, we've had three basic mobile networks: Telstra, Optus, and Vodafone. Now TPG, because they're all part of that big TPG conglomerate. And this week, TPG and Telstra announced that they were going to be doing a whole bunch of spectrum sharing, a whole bunch of mobile tower sharing, such that TPG gets a big boost to its overall population coverage. Telstra gets a whole lot of money, and they share spectrum between them a whole bunch, which probably isn't great news, I guess, if you're Optus.
No.
Now, Nick, you're a man who lives and broadcasts to regional and rural Australia, and you've done so, in fact, for many years, not just on the Western Plains, in fact. How big an issue is mobile broadband or mobile reception in rural and regional Australia these days?
Absolutely massive. Black spots have been an ongoing issue, especially on major highways, especially when it relates to accidents. We saw a huge problem around communication black spots during the fires a couple of years ago. Anytime emergency services are called in, there's always concerns around that. And it's very interesting to me because I think there's often this sense that, oh no, Spotify dropped out while I was driving for a while. And certainly, don't get me wrong, there is a lot of that. It's incredibly frustrating. But we're talking about major issues as well, because people aren't just traveling through these areas, they're living there. And that can be incredibly problematic. I know a lot of people whose internet comes only via satellite. Sky Muster, I know people paying for, I believe it's Skylink, if I'm getting that right, Starlink. Starlink. But we're also talking about people who work in these areas. And while, in Dubbo, we're kind of great, we were in a weird situation that the NBN was half done before the last government change. So in some ways, Dubbo's got this haves and have-nots of who's got fibre to the premises and who, like me, does not. But we also have a scenario where, agriculture has become an incredibly data-hungry industry. There's a lot of control work that's done on farm machinery. There's a lot of important communication that's done. I mean, this is, in many ways, for many farming outfits, high tech. And the infrastructure in terms of communications is not there. So this remains a massive issue in regional areas.
And I mean, the sort of default, having grown up myself in regional Australia, the sort of default thing has just been, well, there's nothing or there's Telstra and
Mm.
that's it. Vodafone as it was then, TPG as it is now, was always almost kind of the distant third cousin. How important do you think the competition side of it is? The idea that instead of just saying, right, well, I just give Telstra my $100 a month, that people are going to be able to say, well, I've got a few choices.
Look, as someone who's had more than their fair share of frustrations as a Telstra customer, I think the competition would be incredibly important. I'd love to be able to say, I'll just drop that account with you and actually have anything to back it up. But of
Yeah.
course, I'm not going to. I don't have an option at the moment. As an old Vodafone user before I switched, even when I'd go and visit my parents who have always lived regionally, it was just, as soon as I got out of Sydney, I assumed I didn't have phone reception until I got to the next major town, and they were the only options. We have an unusual situation about an hour from me. There's a wonderful town called Mendoran, makes amazing cheese. Shout out to the cheesemongers. But you only get Optus reception there. There's one Optus tower, and it's the lone Optus tower that's in the entire area. So it's almost impossible to get Telstra connection there. These are major issues. So yes, I think the competition should be more important than it is. But at the moment, still, it's Telstra or not getting reception on the highway.
So I'm trying to figure this out. Who's the winner? Like, I can see there's a lot in this for Vodafone. Vodafone gets to retire some of their towers, extend their reach, save some money, and become a more attractive competitor to Telstra in places where there's no way they could have picked up customers because they just didn't have customers. They didn't have coverage. In return, Telstra gets a shed load of money. What else? What's in this for Telstra apart from a shed load of money?
So I think I can take this one on. I think, the way they're positioning this is a win-win for both sides. You're right.
Of course they are.
TPG gets a big wedge into regional Australia.
Yeah.
Although it's kind of worth pointing out that the one figure they've given, which is their coverage, they go from 96% to 98.8. And Nick, you mentioned, coverage once you get on the highway.
Mm,
Those figures are always population. So it's where people live. So it's more in the town than it is outside the town. There has been work on that, black spot programs and so on, but they're still largely talking about focusing where people primarily live in larger numbers, not your much, much smaller dwelling spaces or spaces where there might only be one tower.
So Telstra's holding back on them.
Somewhat. So there's a slight wrinkle to this because Telstra has said that it's keeping up to 1 million square kilometres of coverage to itself. And it hasn't exactly said where.
That sounds like a lot, especially when you don't know where it is. It's really a crapshoot at that point.
yeah.
So we lost 1 million square kilometres. I don't mind. No, never mind. We've got 1 million more. But for Telstra's side, they don't just get money because they get access to TPG spectrum as well, which means regionally and potentially city-based.
Including the 5G?
Yes.
Ding,
Right.
ding, ding. There you go. All right, that's
And
what's in it for Telstra.
This is the thing. Telstra can then say, well, we're actually building a better network than our competitors. They've always sold themselves as this premium thing, right? They can say, well, we're proving this because suddenly our network gets better for everyone. And they can also somewhat more justify the challenge with regional telecoms, which has always been justifying the price of it. Not the price they charge a consumer, but the cost to build, because putting up a mobile tower is not cheap. Buying the spectrum is not cheap. It's a lot easier. The harsh market economics of it is that it's a lot easier to justify that if you're in a city of 1 million people than if you're in a village of 100 people. You can put that tower up and you've got 1 million potential customers versus 100. Doesn't mean the 100 don't need telecoms because we all do.
Mm.
But it's a lot easier to justify that. All the money that TPG is going to give them for this offsets that to a beautiful degree.
Nick, didn't the government spend a lot of money on a black spot program to try and fill up regional gaps? Was that supposed to make the people in the city feel that the problem had just gone away?
Look, the Black Spot program's been ongoing, and there's been some work done on it recently. And I believe a report was tabled not that long ago, which came with like a dozen things that should be done. So it's always nice that we have these great meetings and people get together and they say what's going to get done and here's what needs to get done. And it's an incredibly smart look at a very far-reaching strategy. It's not about what needs to be done in the next year or two, although there's elements of that. This program is very much about what should telecommunications look like in 5, 10, 20 years. And it's been embraced very warmly. National Farmers Federation gave it a massive thumbs up, said it's exactly what we've been looking for. But again, these are 12 recommendations, not 12 things that have been embarked on or provided or on their way or have a timeline. And I find that we keep getting there. We get to a point where like people have identified the problem, which I feel like we've been pretty across for a while. They've identified what needs to be done. And then there's this circuit breaker moment where none of that gets followed through on.
We've been trying to call people in rural Australia to ask them what their problems are, but we can't get through. So we figured everything must be okay.
There's a little bit of that. Look, and as someone who has to call out on my radio program to talk to people living regionally, it is, pardon the language, but it's an absolute crapshoot. I have no idea if I'm going to be speaking to a farmer who's just experienced, a fire from a lightning strike and be able to talk to them for more than 5 minutes without that phone line dying and breaking up. I had a wonderful moment with the poor old New South Wales Environment Minister who was outside of Coonabarabran talking about an amazing project that was repopulating endangered native species, or I would have had a great conversation with him, but we could not talk for more than 20 seconds without that phone line dying. So this is real and it affects me in a very personal way every day. But of course, I'm just getting frustrated because it makes my show sound a bit rubbish. For people who are living out there, in some scenarios, this could be life and death.
Now, you mentioned recommendations and things not going forward. There's also the possibility, of course, that the regulator, the ACCC, might step in and say, well, hang on a minute, this looks a bit like a duopoly. What about Optus? Because they're probably still a little bit salty about the whole TPG not building out a fourth brand and succeeding in federal court with merging with Vodafone business of a few years ago. I don't think they've said anything notable on record yet because the deal's still quite fresh. But Adam, do you reckon we'll see a Sim smash on this one? Oh, it won't be Sim smash because he's on his way out. But
Yeah, I was going to say we need someone else with a really cool name here. Like it's just not going to work if it's not Sims. Something else, Smash. We'll work on it. We'll workshop it. They're obviously going to be put out after all the kerfuffle about whether or not Vodafone and TPG should be able to merge, or whether TPG should be held to actually building that fourth network. But I think at the end of the day, they'll be forced to let it go because it is a better deal for customers in regional areas. It's not a better deal in terms of competition, but if it's a better deal in terms of coverage, especially with elections coming up and people like that being able to say to people in the bush, hey, your phone's more likely to work, sounds pretty good. So I think they will just have to let it slide.
yeah, the competition aspect's an interesting one as well because you've got to wonder how much control Telstra is going to have for the very small pool, admittedly, of what are Vodafone effectively MVNOs, because the vast majority of the non-Vodafone brands that are on the Vodafone network are in fact all owned by TPG anyway. iiNet and the like are all just TPG brands, or they're actually run as white labels by Vodafone, which is what Kogan does, for example. So competition in one sense is a little bit of a misnomer here for the MVNOs. But I agree, the actual access and quality argument might win the day. I suppose we'll have to wait and see.
I don't know if Vodafone / TPG, whatever you call them, have many MVNO customers, but if they do you think they will be allowed to access this as well, or Telstra will make part of the deal that no, it's only for your own customers?
I don't know. I'll be honest. I will say I don't know, which is always dangerous. In that, I don't know whether or not they'd really as easily be able to differentiate the traffic. I would imagine that they'd throw all of them over onto, and we discussed this a couple of weeks ago on the show, they'd throw them all over onto the Telstra wholesale network. Same thing that a lot of the supermarket telcos, your Aldi Mobile and your Woolworths Mobile are on, which is parts of the Telstra network anyway. Once you're in that bucket, I don't know that they'd further then subdivide and say, right, well, these ones get the 75% strength source and these ones only get the 50%. And I suppose, again, and I don't mean to be harsh, and Nick, you can jump up and down on my head if you must, for some regional customers, it might not make a big difference because when you've had nothing to compare to, just having another choice is still a big plus.
It is an incredibly big plus, and the caveat here is that I do live in quite a large regional city, so we've got great communications around here. But yeah, I do think that for people who have been just it's Telstra, it's Sky Muster, and they're your only two options. I think any change, any performance enhancement will end up being just incredibly welcome.
Okay, so we've also talked a bunch about EVs on the show of late, and it's an area I know that regional Australia is interested but very cautious about, because obviously once you get regional, once you get rural and the distances get bigger, that big boogeyman of range anxiety crops up into play. Nick, what's being done in regional Australia to make EVs appear more attractive or even feasible in the first place?
Can I just say that I love that you used the term cautious, because I would suggest that for a reasonable chunk of regional New South Wales, outright hostile might be a better way of
Fair,
putting
true,
it.
yes.
There is very much a perception that an electric vehicle is a city car and a city car alone, that if you can't tow a boat behind it, no one needs it. If it's not going to go 600 kilometres on a charge, no one needs it. And of course, these are very not only unrealistic expectations, but also don't match up with some of the electric cars that are available at the moment. Now, New South Wales in particular, on a government level, is making a huge push to trying to get EVs out and about, especially in regional areas. I mean, they're for quite a while now been offering a huge packet of rebates. They're really excited about it. They're trying to push it. They're trying to make sure pricing's going down. Part of that has been helping fund a charging network. Now, NRMA have been unveiling a lot of it, but this charging network is going over some of the major highways. It's going over the Hume. I'm pretty sure it's over the Gamilaroi, a few other highways. There's a charging station recently got launched, in the last few days, in Broken Hill. There's one in Burke. There's one going to be opened in Cobar soon. The idea is that these will add to, and it is very much, I think, on a tourism level more than people living regionally at the moment. But you can ideally grab your Tesla, whatever you're driving at the moment, from Sydney and go out and check out the Broken Hill Festival, see some drag queens at Broken Hill, and do it all by being able to charge yourself on the way without panicking that it's going to be some diesel run charger or trickle charge at a caravan park and hope for the best. It's been cautiously received, I think. There is still a perception that, again, this will only be city folks who need it. In Dubbo, when I got here, I was quite amazed at just how many Tesla charging stations there are all around. And I do mean quite a lot. There's an entire car park bank of them right beside the Western Plains Cultural Centre. What I hadn't realised is that a previous mayor, who is now our mayor again, Matthew Dickerson, he is also a tech podcaster, I should say, and a tech columnist in I think over 120 different publications each week. He is a massive EV evangelist, very much so. Drives a Tesla. Just earlier this week, picked up one of the brand new Hyundais, I believe, as the official mayoral car for Dubbo. Is now an electric vehicle. I believe that's the first of its kind for regional New South Wales. And so he's been very gung-ho about making sure these have been installed. And certainly I think he's been quite excited to see what that means in terms of a push out into further regional areas, the far west, as we like to call it.
Yeah, I think the push for chargers is a really important one. Speaking as someone who drives an EV, and in fact, within the next month, will only have the option to drive an EV. I'm getting rid of my last petrol car, and I live in a city.
Wow.
I'm a city guy. But having said that, I grew up in the country. I do understand the struggle, as it were. That charging network is important, and I think that the plan is something like at least one fast charger every 100 kilometres, which will basically cover any EV you care to name. Some charge faster or better than others, but that would open up a lot of possibilities for this kind of stuff. And it's very much feels to me like it must have felt 100, 120 years ago. You bought a petrol vehicle, but where are the servos?
Yeah.
Where do you fill up? Look, there was a lot of concern when the fast charging network started getting talked about, was that it was going to be an East Coast thing and nowhere else. And it's been great to see that kind of move into proper regional areas and more inland. West of that sandstone curtain, we do exist, and we like these things as well. But it's not necessarily new. WA, when I was living up in the Pilbara region, also not a huge fan of electric vehicles, also didn't believe that they were particularly good for that kind of region. And I remember having a chap in studio up there. He had crossed from Sydney to Perth in his Tesla and was doing a full lap. He was going to head up to Pilbara. That's 16 hours from Perth, to be clear, and was going to head back to Sydney, taking the long way round through Broome. And he was very happy. And yes, as he pointed out, sometimes he's plugging in and hoping for the best and, getting a cup of coffee and hanging around for a couple of hours. Other times it's fine. He and a few mates had actually invested in some mobile diesel chargers that were able to be moved around to get a sense of where people were using them, pay with an app. And I think it was just kind of a bit of an experiment, a bit of fun for him, but he also wanted to prove that this could be done. And of course it can. It's just not as nearly convenient as it needs to be at the moment.
And the convenience thing I always find kind of funny. And I suppose I should say, as an EV driver, I guess I'm on the other side of that religious fence. And I think there is a bit of I'll never drive an EV, or I'll never not drive an EV thing to it.
How do you know if someone drives an electric car?
Because they'll tell you about
They'll tell
you. Of course they will. But the experience of it is an interesting one. I was not that long ago. I was staying up in on the coast, admittedly, but in a little fishing town north of Grafton, and there is one servo there which not infrequently runs out of petrol. It's a thing that happens. And admittedly, I'd driven a petrol car up there at the time, but I was struck by the thought, if I was driving my EV, that could be sitting in the garage, completely fueling itself up. The slow charging doesn't actually matter there. And I think there is this perceptual change as well, especially for people living regionally, of realizing, well, hang on, I don't need to go to the servo anymore. It's a very good idea to have this infrastructure in place as well for road trips and for people, for example, who don't have off-street parking or garages or whatever. Plenty of people like that, even regional and rural, that happens as well. But that capacity to say, well, suddenly I don't need to care if there's an Ampol or a BP or anything like that near me, doesn't matter anywhere near as much. And you see this a lot internationally. In the UK, there's lots of supermarkets where they've just gone, yeah, we've got a wall here. We'll just put up a row of chargers. People can sit there. We'll make money out of them while we're making money out of them because they're shopping here.
Look, a change is absolutely coming, and you can even see it in where we're talking about mining at the moment. There's a lot of push towards, obviously, lithium in WA, and they're looking at making sure they've got their own downstreaming processes. WA's economy has always been a dig it and ship it. For the first time in a while, they're talking about, well, what if we process it as well? And what they're looking at there is for lithium. They want to be able to produce their own battery-ready lithium. It's cobalt around the region I'm at. There's a lot of old gold mines that are possibly being repurposed to look at some of those other rare elements that are used in battery creation. When we're talking about that sort of seismic shift in an industry like mining, the writing is on the wall for where we are heading.
Well, that just about wraps up another episode of Vertical Hold. Thanks to Nic for joining us.
It is always a pleasure to be invited.
And Nic, you've been on the show before. You know what you're about to face, the Vertical Hold 3 questions doom.
I'd actually forgotten entirely.
Well, then I will remind you that I'm going to ask you all 3 in a row.
Yes.
Then you can answer them in any order you like. Bearing in mind that you work on radio these days, where can people hear your work? Where can they find you on social media online? And the big, maybe not contentious question, what's your secret skill or ability, and why does it make you special?
Right. Okay. Secret skill or ability, courtesy of a very unusual high school education. I can solo operate a half herringbone dairy, and I just assume when the great collapse comes, that'll be very important for everyone being able to get cheese, cream, milk. It's on its way. You can catch me on ABC Western Plains if you are in the area. Otherwise, the ABC Listen app lets you choose what station you're listening to, and you can find me there. You'll also hear me occasionally filling in on Sydney radio. I occasionally fill in for evenings when Sarah McDonald's taking a break. You might have heard me doing the quiz a bit earlier this year. And in terms of social media, the best place to find me is on Twitter, assuming you're looking for cat photos, because that's about
And
all
who
it
is
is at the moment. It is Dr. Nic, but that is a DR, an underscore, and an NIC, because the underscore, very cool. And indeed, here's a cat pushing its face into my microphone right now.
It's one
Perfect
of those
timing.
moments where I wish this podcast
Yeah,
had video.
That's about the only time that video would have actually paid off on this show. That was beautiful.
That was fabulous. And speaking of fabulous, you can catch up with us online at Vertical Hold AU on Twitter, at the Vertical Hold Facebook page, or on the web at verticalhold.com.au.
And as always, thanks everyone for tuning in and for leaving us the great reviews. Don't forget to tell your friends about us or even your enemies. We don't care. Our listener's a listener as we continue to talk about the tech that matters in 2022. Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support.
All right.